It didn't start with a flash, or a signal, or some dramatic, sky-splitting anomaly that the public could point at and say, there, that's when everything changed. It started with a correction, a tiny, silent digital correction buried inside a NASA data packet sent out at 03:14 AM on a night when most of the world was asleep. A correction so microscopic that even the astronomers monitoring 3I Atlas didn't notice it. Not at first. But by the time they caught it, the damage was already done, because the correction wasn't an error, it was a warning. If you're the kind of mind this channel was built for, hit subscribe, give this video a like, and help us push this investigation into the algorithm so more people can join this hunt. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now while you're diving into this mystery. In the months leading up to the event, every major observatory was focused on the interstellar object 3I Atlas, the erratic jets, the unnatural spin lock, the internal anomalies that scientists could explain only with words like resonant lattice and structured density profiles. Everyone assumed this was the thing to fear. It wasn't. 3I Atlas was only the breadcrumb. At 3:14 AM, NASA's system registered an automated recalibration of the trajectory. Nothing major. On paper, the path only shifted by 0.008 degrees. That's the kind of adjustment you'd attribute to solar wind interference or data smoothing. But buried inside the recalibration file was a signature. Not biological, not mechanical, not human. A drift pattern, repeating at exact intervals that matched nothing in nature. Perfect timing, perfect spacing, perfect symmetry. Almost like a digital metronome. NASA engineers flagged it, NASA supervisors buried it, and the public never heard a word. Because the moment the pattern repeated a second time, the narrative changed. 3I Atlas wasn't off course. Something else was entering the system. No press conference, no public report, no leaked emails. Those had been scrubbed within hours. But the infrared deep field scans told the truth. There was something behind 3I Atlas, something darker, heavier, hungrier, a mass so cold it barely emitted radiation, a silenced gravitational body gliding through the void like it had been there the entire time, hiding behind the chatter of 3I's anomalies. The real monster, the one no one was supposed to see. It wasn't visible in optical light. It wasn't detectable in radar. It didn't reflect, refract, scatter, or glow. It didn't even block starlight normally. It warped it. Like the space around it was bending in slow motion, trying to pull away but failing. When the anomaly first appeared, NASA classified it as residual gravitational noise, then as a sensor echo, then as system interference. But after 6 hours of tracking, the gravitational distortion stabilized into a coherent profile, one that analysts couldn't deny. This wasn't a cloud, this wasn't debris, and this definitely wasn't a natural companion object. It was structured, moving with intent. If 3I Atlas looked like an object designed to survive a long journey, then this thing looked like the thing that sent it. And the worst part, it was bigger, much bigger, 3 times the mass, 10 times the density, and moving faster than any known interstellar comet ever recorded. NASA renamed it internally, stripping out all poetic labels and mythological references. They called it simply the Follower, because that's exactly what it was doing, following, matching, adjusting, correcting its vector every time Atlas shifted like the two objects were bound by a shared internal clock. And when NASA reanalyzed 5 months of archival data, they discovered a buried truth no one wanted to acknowledge. The Follower had always been there, just beyond the noise threshold, trailing Atlas with a precision no natural object should possess. The signatures matched, the timing matched, the rhythm matched. 3I Atlas wasn't the main event, it was the signal flare, a distraction, a door left ajar. Because while the world obsessed over jets and spin behavior and thermal pulses, something far more dangerous slipped in behind it, something that didn't want to be seen until it was already too late. And on that quiet night in November, the veil finally cracked. NASA didn't announce the change. NASA didn't even acknowledge the anomaly. They just edited the trajectory data, scrubbed the gravity logs, removed the early timestamps, and pretended the course had always been that way. But data doesn't lie. People do. And the truth is simple. 3-Eye Atlas was never the threat. It was the warning. What's coming behind it, that's the real monster. The deeper NASA looked, the more obvious it became. 3-Eye Atlas hadn't been the threat at all. It had been the distraction. Because the new object, the one no agency wanted to acknowledge, behaved in ways that made Atlas look primitive, almost harmless by comparison. It appeared just beyond the heliopause, slipping into view like a shadow peeling itself from the dark. No trail, no coma, no reflected flare. It didn't drift or tumble like a natural body. It held a posture, fixed, oriented, like something waiting. And then, for 40 seconds, it moved. Not across the sky, not through gravity. It moved in radial displacement, a glide sideways across the vacuum with no thrust, no jet, no momentum curve. The kind of movement that makes every physicist go silent because nothing in the known universe does that, unless it has control over inertia itself. With Atlas, NASA could pretend it was a comet. With this, they had no category left to hide behind. Telemetry flagged its first anomaly when the Deep Field Array noticed the stars behind it bending out of sync, not lensing, not mass, not refraction. It was bending the star field as if space around it was being folded, not warped by gravity but flattened, compressed, rearranged into geometric grids, and the grid wasn't random. It matched the same fractal signature buried inside 3-Eye Atlas's core. The two objects were speaking the same language. The first internal memo NASA circulated contained only one sentence. This one is not a traveller, it is an observer. By the 7th hour of tracking, solar wind data revealed something even more disturbing. The new object wasn't deflecting the wind, it was nullifying it. Particles that should have streamed past simply vanished the moment they touched its boundary, like the wind hit a surface that wasn't there, or worse, like it was being absorbed. That triggered the second memo. If Atlas was Phase 1, this is Phase 2. The object's dimensions were impossible to map. Radar didn't return anything. LiDAR failed immediately. Infrared passed through it like fog. Everything that should have bounced simply didn't. It was as if the object existed only in the wavelengths it chose to reveal. And then it revealed something new. A single, razor-thin line of blue plasma ignited along its edge. Directed. Precise. Measured. Not a jet. Not a flare. A signal. The beam extended only 14 kilometers before stopping abruptly, as if the object were writing a line into the darkness, marking a boundary no one had the courage to cross. Across NASA's monitoring room, someone whispered, "Atlas wasn't the warning. This is the warning." During the next observational cycle, the beam shifted orientation, not randomly, but with deliberate steps, like a scanning mechanism locking onto coordinates. Every movement pointed inward, toward the solar system, toward us. And when that beam finally aligned with Earth vector, every instrument monitoring the event recorded a simultaneous spike in background resonance, a low-frequency hum passing through every satellite, every station, every ionospheric detector. It was the same baseline hum that Atlas had emitted weeks earlier, only now it was amplified 1,000-fold. Atlas had been whispering. This thing was speaking. For the first time, NASA openly considered the one possibility they had avoided since the beginning. Atlas wasn't an anomaly. It was a signal buoy, a marker, a probe left behind to prepare the local environment. And this new object, the one slipping beyond the heliopause, was the entity it had been waiting for. A presence older, larger, more advanced than anything humanity had imagined would ever enter our system. The deeper NASA dug into the data stream, the more one truth pressed against them like a weight. Atlas was not the visitor. Atlas was the announcement. And the thing now entering the solar system was the arrival. The moment the second object eclipsed 3-Eye Atlas, every telescope locked on it froze. Not because the feed failed, but because the silhouette didn't match anything humanity has ever catalogued in deep space observation. It wasn't a comet. It wasn't an asteroid. It wasn't even remotely natural. It moved with intent. At first, analysts thought it was just a debris cluster drifting behind 3-Eye Atlas. But then the cluster unfolded. Not slowly, not like ice dislodging, but sharply, cleanly, like a mechanical form responding to a cue. Panels, ridges, symmetry. It spread itself open and absorbed the scattered light from the sun, pulling illumination into an outline that should have been impossible at this distance. The structure was vast, far larger than 3I Atlas, but pitch dark, absorbing starlight instead of reflecting it. NASA's deep-range sensors flagged 3 immediate impossibilities. 1. The object was hollow. 2. The object was stable. 3. The object was changing shape on purpose. That was the moment the mission control room went silent. Not confused, not panicked, silent, because no one wanted to say the word that was already forming in their heads. The monster, as one astronomer whispered under his breath, didn't follow 3I Atlas by accident. It had been there the whole time, hidden, dark, waiting for the right angle of sunlight to reveal its geometry. And the geometry was intelligent. The outer plates rotated into a perfect triangular alignment, with each point orienting towards something different. One toward 3I Atlas, one toward Jupiter, one toward Earth. As soon as it locked into position, everything around the object changed. Radiostatic surged, deep field interference spiked. Lagrange point satellites reported gravitational wobble spikes with no known origin. But the most chilling signal came from the solar orbiter's magnetometers. A pulse, sharp, deliberate, and rhythmic, echoed through the solar wind. Not noise, not flare interference, a signature, a timed, structured signature, and 3I Atlas responded, not violently, not with jets or rotation. It responded with silence. A sudden unnatural stillness, as if the object had been listening, waiting for a call sign it recognized. Then the monster moved, not drifting, not tumbling. It approached. A slow, calculated glide that defied celestial mechanics. No gravitational slingshot, no solar push. It moved like a craft under its own guidance, and it moved toward 3I Atlas with the precision of docking procedure. NASA analysts tried to calculate its mass, but every model collapsed. The readings kept returning the same impossible conclusion. This thing wasn't made of any known matter. It carried no inertia. It moved without drag, almost as if it wasn't fully here. As the distance between them closed, 3I Atlas finally reacted. Not with panic, but with alignment. Its thin jet, the one just discovered in the new images, reoriented itself backward, pointing directly toward the approaching giant shape. The jet narrowed, brightened, sharpened into a perfect needle of light. A directed signal, a message, a request, or a warning. Mission logs described the next moment simply as convergence. The thin jet extended, not physically, but optically, as if space itself bent along its path, and connected with the dark structure's central axis. There was no flare, no explosion, no plume, just absorption. The monster drank in the beam like it was designed for it, like it was waiting for it. Within seconds the structure began to glow, faintly at first, then stronger, nearly forming an outline against the darkness. One NASA engineer muttered, "Is it waking up?" The answer came in the form of a single, universe-quieting moment. The structure flashed. A pulse that rippled through the void so smoothly it didn't behave like light. More like a command, a handshake, a synchronized initialization. And then the system, the pair, locked into perfect rotational matching. 3I Atlas spun. The monster spun. Their axes snapped into alignment as if magnetically linked. Not predator and prey, not ship and cargo. Components. Two parts of one system. One built small, one built colossal, one sent ahead, one following behind, and Earth, watching from a powerless distance, had seen only the scout. The real threat had just revealed itself, and it was finally awake. The monster didn't announce itself with light or heat. It announced itself with silence. Every telescope trained on the region recorded the same impossible drop. A void, a blind patch in space so perfectly dark it erased background stars. Not dimmed, erased. A moving wound carved into the sky. And for the first time since 3I Atlas entered the solar system, the object tracking it began to shift course. The monster wasn't drifting, it was correcting. The data stream spiked. China's fast array caught a pulse reflection, so faint it bordered on quantum noise but too clean to dismiss. It bounced off something smooth, curved and enormous, a surface, but not like metal, more like a boundary, a threshold. Space shouldn't have thresholds. Then came the second signal, a lower tone, almost a gravitational murmur. Not powerful, but structured, like the opening note of something waking up. NASA analysts tried matching it to known natural signatures. Black hole shearing, supernova remnants, pulsar harmonics, nothing fit. The waveform wasn't cosmic, it was geometric. Something was generating it. Something that had been waiting. The void expanded until its edges sharpened into a crescent, curved, measured, a silhouette forming against the starlight. It wasn't round, it wasn't angular, it was layered, rings inside rings, rotating at different speeds, like an impossible gyroscope built from absence instead of matter. Every few seconds the inner ring flickered with small needle-thin bursts of light, almost like feelers brushing the dark. Each burst revealed fragments, a reflective arc, a smooth plane, a seam too straight for nature. Only one question echoed across every control room. How long has this thing been here? And then the light struck it. One stray photon, just a glint from a passing star, hit the structure at the exact angle needed, and what was invisible became unmistakably real. Smooth plates, curved ribs, deep channels winding inward like the grooves of a colossal encoded shell. It wasn't a comet. It wasn't debris. It wasn't dormant. It was coiled, waiting, listening, responding to 3-eye Atlas like a parent turning its head toward a child's cry. As Atlas drifted closer, the rings around the monster accelerated. The void around it tightened, like a cloak retracting. The object held position perfectly, too perfectly, its alignment correcting itself not to face the sun, not to face Earth, but to face Atlas directly. It was a rendezvous, and the distance between them was closing fast. Telemetry from ESA's deep field scanner reported a pressure anomaly. No material, no radiation, just a rearrangement of local space. Something between the objects was compressing. The numbers didn't make sense. Matter density, light density, even vacuum density shifted in coherent waves. Space wasn't being bent, it was being prepared. At first, scientists assumed the larger object was reacting to Atlas, maybe magnetically or gravitationally. But then something chilling happened. The monster emitted a thin spectral line, a narrow, high-frequency beam that was neither radio nor laser. It was something in between, something that refracted through the vacuum like a blade sliding through water. The beam didn't hit Atlas, it scanned it, and Atlas responded. Its thin jet, already proven not to be a natural outgassing, extended toward the beam, aligning like a compass needle snapping toward a magnetic field. The two signals met in the empty dark, merged and stabilized. A connection. Not noise, not a scatter. A handshake. The monster's rings began glowing softly in coordinated pulses. Every pulse travelled inward toward a dark central aperture that expanded with each contraction, like the pupil of a colossal mechanical eye adjusting focus. Something was coming through. The region around the aperture distorted, light curved. Stars wavered like reflections in disturbed water, and then, just for one frame captured by an ESA widefield instrument, the surface behind the aperture wasn't black anymore. It was bright. Not sunlight, not starlight, something else, something structured, an internal glow radiating through a chamber large enough to swallow Atlas whole, and it was opening. America's deep space net caught the infrared surge exactly 3 seconds later. A wave of heat so faint it barely registered, but timed too perfectly with the aperture expansion to ignore. Heat that wasn't escaping, but being allowed to escape, like a hatch cracking open after centuries sealed. Atlas drifted closer, its bizarre jet pulsing with increasing rhythm. Every few minutes a new harmonic entered the signal, the same harmonic pattern detected inside its core, almost like a language evolving in real time, a call, a confirmation, a coordinate exchange. Whatever Atlas was, it wasn't alone, it was part of something bigger, and now that bigger had stepped out of hiding. The aperture widened until it resembled a corridor, a tunnel of concentric plates wrapped in a glowing mist-like field. Measurements confirmed the impossible. The plates weren't rotating, space itself was rotating through them. The object wasn't bending light, it was bending location. A slow, synchronized tremor rippled across the entire structure. Every harmonic matched Atlas perfectly. A resonance lock, a pairing, a synchronized activation, and slowly, elegantly, terrifyingly. The aperture brightened further. Something enormous, smooth, cylindrical, and ringed with luminescent channels was emerging from inside. Not a weapon, not a probe, not a chamber, a pod, a module, a seed, a payload. It detached from the core with a gentle, almost ceremonial drift, and Atlas responded instantly, its jet tightening into a razor-thin line and firing straight into the center of the descending pod. The moment they connected, the surrounding dark folded inward, a ripple of geometry radiating like the petals of a metallic flower unfurling across space. Atlas had not been travelling toward Earth. It had been delivering something, and now, that something was awake. The discovery didn't spread through the scientific community like news, it spread like fear. Because it wasn't just a second interstellar object, it was bigger, darker, and it wasn't passing through the solar system the way 3I Atlas had. It was holding position. At first, telescopes caught only a faint disturbance, a silhouette blotting out a star in Pisces Austrinus for exactly 0.9 seconds. A gravitational dip, then recovery. Silent. Instant. Events like that usually point to cold, dead rocks drifting between stars, but this one repeated. Same star, same duration, same shape, 6 days later. Objects don't do that, not unless they're orbiting something, or circling themselves. The anomaly was logged, filed, and forgotten, until a junior analyst in Chile cross-checked it with deep field scans from the previous month. The pattern matched, but the size didn't. Whatever this thing was, it had grown, or shifted, or unfolded. It took until the third reoccurrence for NASA's Sky Survey team to accept the truth. It wasn't an asteroid, it wasn't a comet, it wasn't a rogue planet, it was a structure, over 238 kilometers, across, a void wrapped in symmetry so precise it broke pattern recognition filters. Every line was too clean, every curve too even, and at its center a spherical heart pulsed with a dim cobalt glow, like a dying eye opening and closing every 11 minutes. At first, they thought it was rotation. Then they realized the pulse wasn't moving at all. The object was rhythmically expanding, breathing, exhaling matter so thin and cold it barely registered, absorbing radiation like a sponge, releasing nothing. A black monolith floating in darkness, inhaling the galaxy. NASA had no classification for it. They had no protocol. They had no explanation for how a 238-kilometer object could distort starlight in perfect intervals, remain motionless relative to background fields, emit structured shadows, and refuse to appear in half of infrared scans. It was like it chose which instruments could see it. Then it changed shape. Not violently, not suddenly, with grace. Panels unfurled, if you could call them panels, extending outward like petals of a flower made from night. Each sheet absorbed starlight and vanished into pure black, the edges shimmering with a fractal geometry too intricate to map. The analysts watching the live feed didn't speak. For a full minute they couldn't, because the object hadn't just expanded. It had transformed into a geometry that matched a 12-year-old mystery, the unknown signal Voyager 1 recorded in 2012, a pattern NASA never released. The same harmonic signature, the same frequency spacing, the same impossible prime number intervals hidden beneath the noise floor. That was the moment everyone understood. 3I Atlas was never the arrival. It was the alert system. The real thing, the one blocking out stars, refolding itself in the dark, pulsing with a slow cosmic heartbeat, had been coming long before humanity knew how to look. And 3I Atlas wasn't the message. It was just the warning. The moment the sensors recalibrated, the picture sharpened, and the illusion that this monster was just another distant anomaly vanished. What emerged wasn't noise. It wasn't a flare. It wasn't cosmic dust scattering sunlight. It was a shape. A structure so large that it dwarfed 3I Atlas, so dark it absorbed starlight, and so sharply defined it couldn't be anything natural. The edges were geometric, mathematically clean, like something carved out of the void by a hand that understood physics on a level we haven't even named yet. At first, analysts thought it was an occlusion artifact, something blocking the telescope array, a glitch, a shadow. But shadows don't move on their own, and this one did, slowly, smoothly, with intention. It drifted through the starfield not like a comet or asteroid tumbling, but like a vessel adjusting itself for alignment, each motion measured, deliberate, and horrifyingly silent. It cast no tail, shed no debris, and left behind no thermal plume. It was colder than the cosmic background, sitting at a temperature objects only reach when they're actively suppressing heat. NASA's internal descriptor was blunt: energy null mass body. Translation: something capable of hiding its own existence. And here's where the dread began to bloom. Because this thing wasn't approaching 3I Atlas. 3I Atlas was approaching it. The trajectory wasn't accidental, it was convergent, like the smaller object had been a messenger, a probe, a signal carrier, and the real Titan behind it was now stepping out of the dark. Exact distance estimates were inconsistent. Mass readings snapped between extremes. But one value remained constant across all models. It was big. Bigger than some moons, dense enough to bend starlight, structured enough to reflect radar like a shaped resonant shell. The real monster wasn't arriving. It had been waiting. And as 3I Atlas drifted closer, almost obediently, the lightless structure uncoiled a long, thin arm, a filament so narrow it could barely be resolved, yet long enough to stretch across thousands of kilometers. It didn't drift. It didn't wave. It locked into position with a rigidity that made analysts freeze. Then it blinked. Not with light, but with gravity. A pulse, weak but precise, shot through the void, synchronizing in perfect timing with the internal heat rhythm, previously recorded inside 3I Atlas. For months, we assumed 3I Atlas was producing those pulses. Now we saw the truth. It wasn't generating them. It was responding to them. The monster was the broadcaster. 3I Atlas was the receiver. And as the pulses grew stronger, 3I Atlas rotated into a perfect axial angle, identical to the phase-lock alignment sequence used by deep space probes when they sync with a command signal. Whatever this Titan was doing, it was issuing instructions. The next moment was even worse. The thin arm of the megastructure emitted a faint ripple, an oscillation so subtle only gravity detectors picked it up, and immediately 3I Atlas's shell, its entire outer crust, shifted. Not cracked, not fractured, shifted, like panels, like armor plating adjusting for docking. The comet was no comet at all. It was a module, a piece, a shard of something older, larger, and infinitely more complex. The structure's gravitational tendril tightened very slightly, like a hand settling gently on the shoulder of something familiar. The telemetry from 3I Atlas changed instantly. Its chaotic signatures flattened, stabilized into a perfect harmonic, as if its entire internal system recognized the presence of a parent object. The first whisper across mission rooms was quiet. This isn't an anomaly. This is a network. 3I Atlas wasn't traveling alone. The second whisper was worse. This thing didn't come to us. We crossed into its territory. And as the two objects synchronized, their combined signature produced a resonance unlike anything ever recorded. Neither electromagnetic, nor acoustic, nor gravitational. Something new. Something engineered. Something intentional. A signal not meant for us. But we heard it anyway. And the last thing anyone expected was how simple it sounded. A greeting, or a countdown. No one agreed on which. The astronomers thought the warning ended with 3I Atlas. They were wrong, because once the first object crossed perihelion, something else appeared in the data, quietly, faintly, like a shadow standing behind a lit doorway. At first it was dismissed as noise in the starfield, a drifting dust line, a fold in the background radiation. But then it moved. Not randomly, not with orbital drift, with intent. The shift was so small that only one of NASA's deep field analysts caught it, a bending of starlight that didn't match gravitational models, a distortion that rippled outward rather than inward, as if space wasn't being pulled by mass but pushed by something hollow and enormous. They recalculated, reprocessed, rephased the frames, and there it was. A second signature. Not a comet, not an asteroid, not a rogue planet, a structure. Something long, impossibly long, gliding through the dark like a needle threading through fabric. Its shape was invisible, but its shadow, its distortion, was unmistakable. A thin linear void, narrower than a moon, longer than a continent. It had been trailing 3i Atlas for months, perhaps years, hidden, silent, watching. And then the chilling realization spread across the room. The distortion wasn't behind 3i Atlas, it was tracking it. Every pivot 3i Atlas made, the shadow matched. Every rotation it corrected, the shadow compensated. Every pulse, every flare, every internal anomaly. The second object responded, like a mirror with a delayed reflection, like a guardian, like a parent, or something far worse. NASA's internal logs described it with one phrase: Object B exhibits escort pattern motion. Escort pattern, as in formation flight, as in convoy behavior, as in protection. If 3i Atlas was the warning, then Object B was the reason for the warning. The team scaled the distortion, mapped it backward, enhanced it, filtered it, and suddenly the geometry took shape. It wasn't linear by accident, it was built that way, hollow in the middle like a spine of some extinct beast. Except this beast wasn't dead, and it wasn't organic. The refraction suggested negative mass pockets spaced at perfect intervals, like empty chambers designed to absorb gravitational force. No natural body forms cavities that way, and no spacecraft we've ever imagined could be that large. One scientist whispered what everyone else refused to say aloud. It's not travelling. With 3i Atlas, it's controlling it. Because the moment 3i Atlas fired its first directed jet, Object B shifted position by exactly 0.016 degrees, just enough to stay aligned with the jet vector, as if analysing it, measuring it, or following it like a signal. And then something even stranger happened. The shadow blinked. Not visually, not optically. It blinked gravitationally. A pulse, sharp, clean, triangular in wave structure, shot outward from Object B and struck 3i Atlas dead center. Instantly, 3i Atlas spun faster, like the signal tightened its internal system. It was a command, an activation, a trigger. 3i Atlas wasn't drifting through space. It wasn't lost. It wasn't alone. It was part of a formation. The entire control room fell silent as the second object's profile stabilized on screen, a massive spear-like shape emerging through invisible geometry, defined only by its distortion of the void. One engineer couldn't help whispering, "If this is the escort, what is it escorting it to?" No one answered, because another pulse hit 3i Atlas, then another, timed, measured, rising. It wasn't a warning anymore, it was preparation, and whatever the real monster was, it hadn't shown itself yet. It should have ended there. The world should have been able to breathe, even if only for a moment. But before analysts could finish decoding the telemetry from Atlas's last pulse, something else appeared, something larger, darker, and far less forgiving. It didn't arrive with a flare. It didn't announce itself with heat or light. It arrived as a hole, a void, a circular absence in the starfield so perfectly black that image processing software flagged it as corrupted data. But it wasn't an error. It was moving. A perfect disk of nothing, advancing through the heliosphere like a shadow cast by something that shouldn't exist in space, something without mass, without reflection, without signature. For the first 2 minutes, the only thing satellites could detect was gravitational warping. Star positions behind the object twisted, spiraled, then snapped back as the void glided through the solar wind, as if it were slicing reality itself open. Then, finally, the edge of the thing caught the sunlight. Not metal, not ice, not plasma, but a faint razor-thin crescent of refracted starlight, bending around a shape so dark it made black holes look bright. Physicists scrambled to interpret the distortion patterns. Einstein rings formed where they shouldn't, at angles no lensing structure could produce. Whatever it was, it dwarfed 3i Atlas by an order of magnitude. If Atlas was the bullet, this was the gun, and it was aimed directly toward the inner solar system. When NASA enhanced the contrast to stabilize the contours, the full shape emerged, slowly, like a nightmare resolving into form. It was not spherical. It was not irregular. It was hexagonal. 6 perfect edges, 6 equal faces, a geometry so exact it immediately eliminated the possibility of natural formation. Even Saturn's polar hexagon, a planetary scale atmospheric anomaly, looked chaotic compared to this. This was clean, sharp, engineered. The object drifted with a precision that violated orbital mechanics. Space dust didn't stick to it. Solar wind didn't bend around it naturally. It flowed around the edges as if guided by invisible channels. And for just a moment, every probe within detection range heard a faint low-band oscillation, a hum, smooth, even purposeful. That was when the realization spread through mission control rooms across the world. 3i Atlas may not have been the threat. It may have been the beacon, a messenger, a scout, a trigger. And the thing emerging from deep space, the hexagonal Leviathan, was responding to the signal Atlas had been pulsing for months. The two objects weren't related by coincidence. They were linked. The nightmare wasn't the interstellar rock that behaved like a machine. The nightmare was the thing following it, the one that didn't want to be seen, but was far too large to hide for long. Solar probes watching the void saw something else then, something worse. A thin slit opened along one of its faces, not mechanically, not like an iris or a hatch, like a wound. A seam cracking open to reveal a line of deep red luminescence glowing inside a body of total darkness. And then, the hum changed. It sharpened, like a signal locking onto a target. Not Atlas, not Jupiter, not the Sun, Earth. Sensors across the lunar farside array spiked as the frequency focused like the narrowing beam of a lighthouse. Not broadcasting outward, focusing inward. The hexagon wasn't simply travelling through space. It was scanning, mapping, measuring, testing. And every model said the same thing. Its trajectory was matching Atlas's path, down to the decimal. The real monster had arrived, and it wasn't stopping. The warning signs didn't come from the sky this time. They came from the quiet places, the deep space receivers that almost never report anything except noise. At 04:12 UTC, 3 stations, one in Chile, one in Namibia, one on the far side of Australia, registered the same anomaly within the same second. A low-band pulse. Not bright, not loud, but perfectly timed. And they all pointed back toward the same place. The region of Space 3i Atlas had crossed, 21 days earlier. At first, Mission Control thought it was just an echo, a leftover fragment of solar wind bouncing along the heliospheric boundary. But then the second pulse struck, stronger, sharper, directed. This one didn't fan out like natural radiation. It carved a path, thin, laser clean, as though something in the dark was aiming. The pulse skimmed past Earth's magnetic field, traced the edge of the ionosphere, and then, bizarrely, angled downward into the South Pacific like it had coordinates. NASA went silent. Minutes later, the third signal arrived. Not a pulse, not a burst. A pattern, 12 peaks, 12 drops, 12 stabilizing lows. The signature was unmistakable. It matched the timing of Atlas's internal anomalies, the same rhythm used by the jets, the pulses, the harmonic shells, the gravitational heartbeat. In other words, whatever sent that signal knew Atlas, because it spoke in Atlas's language. Inside the telemetry room, every display that could show live cosmographic tracking updated at once. All 3 ground stations confirmed the same impossible conclusion. The source of the signal wasn't static, it wasn't anchored, it was moving, fast, and on a trajectory that intersected Earth's orbit. Within 19 days. The idea that something followed Atlas was already controversial, but the data now showed something far worse. Something was pacing it. Atlas hadn't been alone. It had been the lead, a front scout, or worse, a decoy. And the real monster, the one astronomers had whispered about in coded memos and off-record sessions, was emerging from behind the dust corridor Atlas carved through space. By 0422 UTC, NASA's dark signal processors finally reconstructed a partial profile from the reflected bands. Not an image, not a shape, a shadow. A void where starlight should have been. A perfect absence, moving with deliberate inertia. Large enough to occlude background stars but transparent to microwave scans. That meant one thing. Whatever it wasn't made of normal matter. It was bending light around itself like a gravitational sheath, a cloak. The engineers didn't say it out loud, but everyone in that room thought the same thing. This isn't another comet. This is something built. And then the fourth signal hit. Not a smooth pulse, not a harmonic wave, a slam, a violent short-band compression that rattled the ionosphere and forced the systems into fail-safe mode. Alarms triggered. Telemetry froze. For a moment, the room's lights flickered. When the system rebooted, a new symbol appeared on the analysis schematic. A small, sharp spike tagged with a code no one expected. GRAV, D19, Unclassified Gravitational Discontinuity. It wasn't a magnetic distortion. It wasn't solar interference. It was a miniature space-time fracture, and it came from the object behind Atlas. One scientist whispered what everyone else was too afraid to say. That wasn't a signal, that was a door. Because the spike wasn't a message. It wasn't even directed at Earth. It was a transit marker, a destabilizing push, like something forcing its way from one region of space into another. Whatever followed, Atlas hadn't just accelerated, it had jumped. The noise outside the telemetry room turned into shouting. New data poured in. Speed estimations spiked from 9 km/s to 28 km/s at over 150 km/s. By the time they recalibrated for interstellar interference, the truth slammed into them. The follower wasn't approaching Earth. It had already passed the halfway mark of the solar system. It was inside the orbital path of Mars, and accelerating. Atlas had been disturbing, but predictable. This thing wasn't. It wasn't drifting, it wasn't tumbling, it wasn't shedding mass. It was controlled, guided, silent, and worst of all, it was ignoring everything that pushed Atlas off course. Solar wind, gravitational wells, Jovian interference, none of it mattered. This object moved like it owned the laws of motion. NASA reclassified it as Object S47, designation, unknown, non-cometary, kinematic autonomous structure. Then came the final blow. At 04:39 UTC, the anomaly emitted a brief narrow beam of infrared, not outward into space but directly backward, along the path Atlas had travelled. A backward transmitted ping, a check-in, a handshake, a sync request. Atlas hadn't sent it. Something inside Atlas had responded. Just 2 seconds later, a faint thermal spike appeared inside Atlas's core. The same core NASA insisted was cold, stable, and neutral. It lit up, just for a moment, but enough. Enough to prove the unthinkable. The two objects were communicating. Atlas wasn't just a warning, it had been a beacon, and the thing following it, the real monster, was finally close enough to answer. The closer the object drifted into solar alignment, the more the data refused to behave. What should have been routine telemetry, brightness curves, gas signatures, trajectory vectors, came back bent, thinned, distorted as if the numbers themselves were flinching. NASA analysts watched their live feed stutter for a full 7 seconds before the screen stabilized, and when they did, the object was gone, not vanished, not cloaked, shifted. A gravitational kink, barely measurable, almost negligible, passed across the heliocentric frame. That ripple should not have influenced anything larger than a dust grain. Yet 3I's position jumped 49 kilometers off its predicted course. Not slowly, not drifting. Instant. That single jump rattled every model. You don't move an interstellar body that fast unless something inside it is able to cheat inertia at a scale nothing in astrophysics can replicate. And the moment it reappeared on sensors, the warning object behind it, the faint echo NASA hoped was an artifact, brightened again. This time, sharply, purposefully. The real monster was not hiding anymore. Spectrographs lit up with an emission spike so narrow, so precise that the machines temporarily flagged it as man-made radio compression. But it wasn't radio, and it wasn't light. It was something between them, an exotic frequency threading through the solar wind like a needle passing through fabric, guided by a hand humanity cannot see, and, behind that spike, the shape grew clearer. It dwarfed 3I Atlas by a factor of 9. Not jagged, not frozen, smooth, elongated, and disturbingly symmetrical. If 3I Atlas was the scout, this was the carrier, the solar wind distorted around it. Not like an obstruction, but like the object was telling the particles where to go. It bent plasma without heat, redirected radiation without reaction. No comet does that, no asteroid, no rogue planet. Only one thing in known engineering behaves with that kind of elegance: a vessel. The data stream trembled. Even the ground teams fell silent as the telemetry refined its shape into something unmistakable. 2 parallel spines, a hollow central channel, and a void at the front, dark, sharp-edged and mathematically perfect. Not a cavity, a port, a structure designed to receive something, or release something. NASA cut public telemetry at that moment. The feed went black for precisely 3 minutes. When it returned, the object's size was quietly corrected downward by 270%, its reflectivity reinterpreted, and its geometry smoothed into a non-threat profile. But the raw logs, the pre-correction data, never lies. The real object is still there, still brightening, still aligning behind 3i Atlas like a parent stepping into a doorway its child just opened. And the most chilling part wasn't the size, wasn't the symmetry, wasn't the impossible energy readings. It was the movement, because as 3i Atlas rotated, slowly, rhythmically, the massive structure behind it rotated with it. Not following, not drifting, mirroring, every shift, every tilt, every axial correction, as if the two objects were not separate, as if they were synchronized, as if they were built for each other, and every expert in that sealed room, every astrophysicist staring at those mirrored rotations, realized the same thing at the same moment. 3i Atlas wasn't running from anything. It was guiding something into position. The monster didn't reveal itself all at once. At first, astronomers thought the new object behind 3i Atlas was just an echo. Light bending off dust, a gravitational smear, maybe even a sensor artifact caused by the insane magnetic distortion the first interstellar visitor was already generating. But then the smear thickened, stretched, took shape, and every person watching the live telemetry feed felt that same cold, instinctive tightening in their chest. This wasn't a reflection. It was a shadow cast by something that wasn't blocking light, but bending it. The region of space behind Atlas rippled like a sheet of glass flexing under heat. Stars elongated into thin vertical streaks. Some shifted red, others blue, but all of them warped around a single gigantic outline, one so massive that it hid itself not through darkness, but through gravity. Then the distortion moved, not drifting like a comet, not drifting like debris. It adjusted, corrected, aligned. The telemetry stream froze for a moment as every system tried and failed to model the object's mass. The vectors didn't make sense. The gravitational slope was too steep, the depth too precise, the curvature too engineered. Something enormous had matched Atlas's trajectory perfectly, but it wasn't following it. It was pacing it. And then, just as the world was still arguing over what they were looking at, the distortion opened. A slit appeared in the gravitational haze, thin as a surgical incision, perfectly straight, cutting across the starfield like someone had sliced space itself. A soft, pale illumination spilled outward through the seam. Not starlight, not plasma, not reflected solar glow. It was internal light, contained light, controlled light, light from inside a structure larger than any natural object humanity had ever recorded. The slit widened, only by a fraction, but enough for instruments to register something horrifying. The gravitational waves inside the seam were oscillating, not decaying, not scattering, oscillating. They formed a repeating waveform, steady, mechanical, intentional, some kind of signal, some kind of language. And before anyone could decode it, the seam snapped shut. The gravitational field smoothed. The distortion collapsed back into silence. But it was too late. Everything had changed. Because for the first time, the monster behind 3i Atlas didn't just reveal its mass. It revealed its behavior. An engineered gravitational aperture, one that could open and close on command, wasn't natural. It wasn't evolutionary. It wasn't geological. It was architectural. The implications hit every mission director, every analyst, every sleepless physicist in the room simultaneously. If Atlas was the warning, this was the sender. The real object, the one bending the light, manipulating the space around itself, wasn't interacting with our star. It wasn't interacting with our system. It wasn't even interacting with Atlas. It was interacting with the path Atlas was taking, like something tracking a delivery route, or monitoring a deployed instrument, or following a probe back to wherever it had been sent. Atlas wasn't alone. It was never alone. The monster behind it was the origin point, and it was watching. Then the shockwave came, not physical, gravitational. A soft, pulsing ripple spread across space, passing through Atlas, passing through the dust, passing through every sensor like an invisible tide. No thermal spike, no magnetic flux, just a push, a whisper of force, a coded tap on the edge of space-time. Every gravimetric monitor blared, every model buckled, every theory shattered, because the wave didn't propagate outward like an explosion or collapse inward like a signature of mass decay. It curved. It curved around Atlas, bent along the object's perimeter with unnatural precision, and then redirected toward the sun-facing side of the monster, as if the wave had been received, as if it had been answered. Then something even stranger happened. Atlas, still spinning, still emitting its narrow jet, still behaving with the unnerving intelligence that had made global headlines, responded with a faint but unmistakable change in its internal harmonic pulse, a frequency shift, a soft correction, a pattern change. Atlas wasn't panicking, it was sinking. Every sensor trendline aligned into a terrifying interpretation. The monster wasn't chasing Atlas, it was communicating with it, and Atlas was responding as if the two were never separate objects at all. They were parts, a probe, and the carrier it came from, the warning, and the thing capable of sending it. What everyone assumed was the most dangerous object humanity had ever encountered, 3I Atlas, was suddenly dwarfed by the realization that it was tiny, a fragment, a breadcrumb, a scout. The real thing, the larger thing, was now partially visible, and worse, it wasn't slowing down. The gravitational distortion began tightening again, compressing the space around it, like a ship preparing to change state, reduce profile, or engage a system no human language had a name for, and Atlas reacted instantly, changing its jet angle by a fraction of a degree, tiny, precise, directed, like a beacon adjusting its signal to the mothership. Every analyst watching froze. They weren't guessing anymore. They understood. Atlas wasn't the monster. It was the message. This was the arrival. The instruments weren't supposed to trigger again. They had already maxed out their alert thresholds twice in the last hour. But at 0211 UTC, every deep space monitor listening to the region behind 3I Atlas lit up like a power surge from the void. A new signature entered the field. Not a jet, not a fragment, not tail debris. A shadow, moving through solar dust as if it were cutting through a fog that didn't touch it. The first to see it was the Chilean Infrared Ridge, a quiet, unpublicized array NASA piggybacks data from. What their operators witnessed didn't match any standard morphology. The dust pattern behind 3I Atlas parted, not because something pushed it, but because something ignored it. A clean geometric vacancy formed, a tapered void carved into the particle stream, moving in perfect parallel to 3I Atlas's trajectory. For a moment, the entire scientific team froze. Objects make wakes, debris makes turbulence, nothing makes geometry. Analysts assumed it had to be a defect, maybe a calibration error, maybe a software hiccup. But then the curve of the void sharpened, forming an unmistakable shape, a long, needle-thin silhouette gliding through the dust, matching 3I Atlas's speed within meters per second. And it wasn't illuminated, it was simply there because everything else refused to occupy the space around it. The void was the object, whatever it was. It measured nearly 7 kilometers long and less than 200 meters thick, a blade of absence wrapped in a field too clean, too precise to be natural. Worse, it was gaining definition with every passing minute as solar wind carved its edges even clearer. NASA's classified telemetry system flagged 15 anomalies in under 90 seconds. Not one of them was dismissed. And then the object performed its first impossible maneuver. It tilted, not tumbling, not drifting, rotating with surgical precision around its own razor-thin axis, as if turning to face 3I Atlas. That was when the plasma screen spiked. A line of ionized dust, previously moving along a natural gradient, suddenly bent toward the structure, drawn as if by an invisible force. The wake of particles traced the outline of the shape, revealing its full profile. A symmetrical lance-shaped body, angular, hydrodynamic and silent. No comet fragment looked like that. No asteroid maintained that shape under solar wind. Whatever it wasn't debris. And then 3I Atlas reacted. For the first time in its entire trajectory, its tail shuddered. A flicker of destabilization, almost like surprise. A thin, directed jet, so clean it sliced through its own coma, burst from the surface and pivoted toward the new arrival. Not to push it away, not to strike it, to scan it. The jet passed along the side of the void object, grazing it with a ribbon of ionized plasma. And that's when the sensors screamed again, because the stray particles hitting the object did not scatter. They vanished, not burned, not vaporized, just erased from the scan as if absorbed by something with no surface, no texture, no physical presence. A gravitational anomaly registered within the same heartbeat, only for an instant, but long enough. The object had mass, yet it behaved like something that understood how to hide that mass except in moments of exposure. The scientific community had no word for it, so they invented one. The mirror. Not because it reflected light, it didn't, but because the absence it created was a perfect inversion of everything around it. Particles, magnetic field lines, even solar wind behaved differently within a narrow zone surrounding it. And as the mirror drew closer, the plasma jet from 3I Atlas retracted. Not violently, but like a greeting had been acknowledged, and the conversation was moving forward. That's when the mirror finally emitted its first signature. A single pulse, quiet, soft, directed, and aimed not at Earth, not at the Sun, but directly into the core of 3I Atlas. It was a handshake, the kind that happens between things built to understand each other. And the worst part, every detector on Earth confirmed the same chilling truth. The signal wasn't new. It matched a faint echo recorded once 12 years ago, from the opposite side of the heliosphere, on a dying spacecraft that wasn't supposed to hear anything ever again. Voyager 1. The mirror wasn't approaching 3I Atlas for the first time, it was catching up. The ocean didn't rise this time, the sky didn't tear, no alarms blared from orbit. What changed now was quieter, so quiet that only 3 deep-field neutrino stations caught it before the world even knew to panic. A second object had entered the system, not approaching, not slowing, just appearing, phasing into detectability like something stepping into the light after watching from behind the curtain. It wasn't bright, it wasn't large, it wasn't even fully solid on instruments. It was a shadow, a gravitational bruise smeared across space, dragging a ripple of dark energy with it like a wake. And it wasn't drifting randomly. It was matching 3I Atlas's trajectory with microscopic precision, as if tethered to it by something deeper than gravity. The first station flagged it as noise, the second flagged it as danger, the third flagged it as sentient patterning. 3 confirmations, 3 signatures, 3 agencies going silent at once. The data packets were sealed, rerouted, buried under routine telemetry updates no civilian would ever question. And then, without warning, 3I Atlas reacted. Its thin directed jet, the impossible, surgical plume that started this entire investigation, tilted by exactly 0.47 degrees, a correction so small it would have been dismissed as noise if not for what followed. The shadow object tilted with it. But 3I moved first. That was the detail that terrified everyone, because it meant the second object was not guiding 3I Atlas, it was following it, and whatever it was, it understood the language of the jet. An emission plume no natural body should produce became a method of communication, a signal beam, a guide rail, a command pointer between 2 things that should not exist. The shadow sharpened, the jet brightened, and the gap between them shrank with every passing second. This wasn't pursuit, this was rendezvous. By the time analysts reconstructed the frames, the truth was already undeniable. 3I Atlas wasn't alone. It never had been. It was the scout, the beacon, the warning, the new object, colossal in mass despite its ghost-like profile, emerged fully into the solar wind, its outline stabilizing as particles illuminated its structure. Not hard edges, not metal, layers, rippling fractal layers that folded into themselves like origami built from gravitational sheets instead of material. Probes watching from far-flung orbits recorded something no scientist was prepared to see. The directed jet from 3I Atlas curved, wrapped around the newcomer, and locked into its structure like a docking mechanism made of pure energy. The moment contact was made, the solar wind between them collapsed flat, dead silent, like space had been, muted, and then the combined silhouette expanded, not physically, energetically. A bloom of low-frequency gravitational pulses rolled outward, slow and orderly, like the heartbeat of something waking from eons of hibernation. Models showed a terrifying implication. The new object wasn't approaching the sun. It was positioning itself behind 3I Atlas the way a shield positions itself behind a spear. The warning had arrived first. Now the thing that needed the warning, the real monster the title promised, had stepped onto the stage. It was larger, older, hungrier for the solar wind's touch, and 3I Atlas, now dwarfed beside it, angled its jet downward, directly toward the ecliptic, not to maneuver, not to accelerate, but to point, to mark, to aim at something, somewhere, on Earth. And the new object responded. A second jet formed, but unlike the razor-thin plume 3I Atlas produced, this one looked like a rip in the dark. No particles, no heat, just a void beam that devoured light around it. The two jets merged into a single line, tracing across millions of kilometers of space, connecting these interstellar bodies into a weaponized geometry no one could decipher. Every satellite that crossed that line failed instantly, not destroyed, obliterated from telemetry, as if the beam didn't break them, as if it deleted them. And Earth's rotation would in hours bring the planet directly into alignment with that line. 3I Atlas had been the warning. This was the thing it was warning us about. And the line, calculated frame by frame, was aiming directly at one point on Earth's surface. Somewhere no one expected. Somewhere absolutely unprepared. Somewhere unforgivingly normal. A town. A city. A patch of land where people were sleeping, unaware that two impossible objects were drawing a line across the solar system straight toward them. And the beam trembled. Not unstable. Charging. Charging for what? A signal? A strike? A message? A search? No one knew. But the final data frame captured before blackouts cascaded across half the deep space network said one thing, unmistakably clear. 3I Atlas wasn't the threat. It was the key. And the thing behind it was the door. The realization spread through mission control like a cold front. 3I Atlas wasn't the threat. It was the signal flare. Every anomaly, every engineered pulse, every impossible rotation pattern, it had all been pointing toward a single direction in deep space, a vector that NASA brushed off as nothing more than a coincidence of trajectory. But now the vector wasn't empty. It wasn't dark. It wasn't silent. It was moving. New data from the Kuiper Belt outpost came in as a blurred sequence of gravitational spikes, tiny tremors at first, like distant footsteps through the void. The observatory flagged them as noise until the spikes grew stronger, clearer, synchronized. Not random waves, not drifting debris. Something enormous was passing through the outer solar boundary, and it was casting a shadow, not in light, but in gravity. A gravitational silhouette. The first visual confirmation came minutes later. A faint, knife-thin crescent of reflected sunlight sliding across deep blackness, like a blade catching fire. Not a comet, not an asteroid, not anything that should move with that kind of silence or intention. It wasn't tumbling, it wasn't drifting, it was approaching. Every instrument tracking 3I Atlas jolted at the same time. The tiny engineered comet changed behavior. Its core flared once, one crisp, narrow jet, perfectly aligned with the incoming object, a pulse of light, a call sign. The monster answered. The gravitational field distortion warped, tightened, then snapped into a shape, a long skeletal arc stretching hundreds of kilometers, like ribs of a colossal structure drifting in a sea of starlight, then another arc, and another. Each curve appeared one after another, unveiling itself piece by piece, too fast and too deliberate to be natural. It was a frame, a hull, a structure so large that if it had been visible in ordinary light, it would have eclipsed half the stars behind it. NASA analysts froze. The room went silent, every screen filled with the same image, a megastructure, not built of rock or ice or metal as we understand it, but something flexible, reactive, alive with shifting bands of dark, matter-like material. As the arcs aligned, a central mass flashed, briefly, like an eye-opening. That was the moment the telemetry cracked. The Kuiper sensors didn't just detect mass, they detected information flow, packets of ordered rhythmic pulses riding on the gravitational waves, a transmission, directed at 3I Atlas, and the little interstellar messenger responded in kind, pulsing its jet in a sequence the analysts had seen before, the same intervals embedded in its core anomalies. A dialogue. The monster was communicating. The outer solar system brightened with refracted sunlight as a long blade-like silhouette moved past Eris, carving through space with impossible precision. Its size dwarfed every known object of comparable distance. Its speed wasn't ballistic. It was regulated, controlled, perfectly smooth, like something sliding down a rail made of gravity. Whatever it was, it had been travelling for a long time, possibly longer than human history, possibly longer than Earth itself. As the structure angled toward the inner system, 3I Atlas shifted again. Its jet narrowed into a pencil-thin beam, its rotation synchronized with the approaching mass. Its thermal signatures dropped into near-perfect stillness. It was preparing, positioning, acting as a beacon. The monster answered with one final act. Space around it rippled in a perfect lattice, hexagonal, layered, fractal. Just like the impossible patterns buried inside 3I Atlas. The same architecture, the same design, the same logic. That was the confirmation. 3I Atlas wasn't alone. It wasn't unique, and it wasn't the threat. It was the scout. The incoming object was the one it had been calling, the one that had finally answered, and it was almost here. The first warning wasn't the brightness spike. It wasn't the plasma curl. It wasn't even the thin, needle-like jet cutting through the coma like a surgical beam. It was the silence. Every object that enters the inner solar system begins to hiss in radio. Static, ion noise, dust jitter, solar wind crackle. But whatever was trailing 3I Atlas stayed quiet. Too quiet. The only reason astronomers noticed it at all was because of a shadow, a faint disruption in the particle stream that shouldn't have existed, like a dark fingerprint smudged into the solar wind. It drifted behind Atlas for days, matching velocity, matching angle, never overtaking, never falling behind. At first, the modelling teams called it a wake density ripple. Then, when the pattern held, they renamed it Object B. 3 hours later, after the first composite image finally sharpened enough to reveal a solid form, the unofficial name spread across mission channels, the Follower. It wasn't round. It wasn't tumbling. It wasn't shedding dust or heating from one hemisphere like a natural body. It was streamlined. A long, tapered silhouette with razor definition, like something built for efficiency rather than chance. But the real terror came when they measured the distance. Object B wasn't drifting behind 3I Atlas. It was tracking it. Every course correction Atlas made, every wobble, every twitch of the thin, directed jet, the Follower mirrored with perfect fidelity, as if the two objects were wired together by an invisible tether. Teams expected divergence, a delay, something. But the delay never came. Milliseconds became microseconds. Microseconds collapsed to zero. Two objects in absolute lockstep, one leading, one following, like a predator moving behind prey or a sentinel shadowing a returning craft. The final analysis sealed it. Object B didn't just follow Atlas. It anticipated it. The Follower adjusted trajectory 3 to 7 seconds before Atlas made its moves, aligning itself as though it already knew where Atlas would be. No natural gravitational coupling works like that. No passive object predicts movement. This wasn't a coincidence of trajectory, it was choreography, and the choreography broke every model. As solar wind pressure intensified, Atlas deployed its narrow beam again. That impossible needle jet that kicked with too much precision to be random outgassing. Instead of flaring outward, the thin beam bent sharply, cutting through the coma like a guidance laser. Object B reacted instantly. A bright ripple of particles fanned across its leading edge, a shimmering arc of polarized dust that aligned perfectly with Atlas's beam as if acknowledging it. The follower wasn't scanning the beam, it was receiving it. Teams at the Deep Space Array began running correlation cross-maps, overlaying Atlas's beam patterns with the follower's particle responses. The two signatures locked together like a message: pulse, arc, shift, return, again, again, again. A rhythm too clean to be natural, too functional to be coincidence, too deliberate to ignore. It wasn't communication with Earth, it was communication between them. The realization hit hard. 3i Atlas was never travelling alone. It was part of a pair, or worse. The smaller object wasn't a companion, it was an assessor, watching, measuring, confirming. For what purpose, no one dared to say aloud. But the final clue arrived when the follower slipped out of the solar wind and into a calmer zone, revealing more of its structure. Not ice, not dust, not porous rock, flat surfaces, angled edges, a keel-like underside hinting at intentional shaping, and at the front, a faint glow, pulsing in the same sequence Atlas used when firing its directed jet. Two objects, one signal, shared timing, shared behaviour, not a comet train, not a debris pair, a system, one leading, one auditing. And the world, buried in its normal noise, had no idea that the first object was never the danger. It was the announcement. The real threat was what had been following it all along. The silence didn't last. It never does with objects like this. As Earth rotated beneath the void, new data, quiet, unannounced, almost intentionally buried, began leaking from two separate deep space monitoring networks. Each signal pointed to the same impossible conclusion. The second object wasn't just large, it wasn't just active, it was awake. And worse, every behaviour it exhibited was synchronized with 3i Atlas. The first sign came from the spectral drift. Observatories tracking the new incoming body began seeing frequency oscillations, identical to the ones logged from Atlas months earlier, those same soft, low-amplitude patterns that seemed meaningless at first, until they repeated with machine-like precision. Then the pulses sharpened, then they aligned, then the arrays caught the moment they locked. A shared cycle. Two distinct interstellar objects separated by tens of millions of kilometers, pulsing as if they shared a single internal clock. This alone sent shockwaves through every back-channel research group, but what came next fractured their remaining confidence. The object's interior lit up, not externally, not as a flare, not as reflected sunlight. The glow came from within, deep inside the mass, where no natural light should exist. It flashed once. A long, slow, silent wave of illumination rolled outward through the structure, tracing its geometry like a finger running across the spine of a machine. Arc-like bands appeared. Curved inner surfaces glowed, then dimmed, then glowed again, each pulse brighter than the one before. Observers initially assumed internal heating, a thermal imbalance, maybe even tidal friction. But no natural mechanism fits the pattern, because the pulses weren't random, they were counting upward, and the count matched the Atlas cycle exactly. That's when NASA's internal modelling team made the discovery that turned a strange event into an existential red alert. The glows weren't thermal, they weren't chemical, they weren't fracture events, they were structural tests. The object was checking itself, running diagnostics, and the brightness wasn't a byproduct, it was feedback. The deeper the pulse travelled, the clearer the underlying structure became. For the first time, the internal architecture of this newcomer revealed its shape. It wasn't fractured, it wasn't layered like a comet, it wasn't porous, it was a lattice, a repeating geometric framework of hexagonal voids, rectangular conduits, and smooth curved chambers that looked disturbingly like engineered load-bearing ribs. But the centre was the part no one expected. A hollow cylinder. Perfect. Symmetrical. Reinforced by 3 rotating rings of unknown material, and each time the pulse hit it, the rings responded, moving slightly, shifting position by millimeters, like gears waiting for another component to arrive and complete the system. That was the moment the comparisons began. 3i Atlas had a cavity. This new object had a cavity. Atlas had rotating internal dust behaving like a reaction wheel. This object had ringed internal stabilizers. Atlas pulsed. This one pulsed. Both objects had internal structures arranged around a central axis that served no natural purpose. Two strangers from interstellar space. Two identical patterns. Two synchronized behaviors. No one in any agency said it out loud, not yet, but the implications seeped through every quiet message, every redacted memo, every hushed midnight meeting. This was not coincidence. This was a fleet. The fear wasn't that both objects were artificial. The fear was that they were parts of something larger. And as the new object rotated, completing its diagnostic sequence, it gave Earth the final piece of its silent, horrifying message. The directed jet appeared, thin, focused, clean, not random venting, not thermal outgassing. A knife-thin beam of ionized particles erupted from the object's lower hemisphere, slicing across the void with impossible precision. The jet held its shape for 19 full seconds, straight, unwavering, directed. When plotted backward, its origin aligned perfectly with a channel running through the internal cavity. When plotted forward, the beam pointed exactly toward 3i Atlas, not toward the Sun, not toward Jupiter, not toward any gravitational attractor. Direct line of sight to Atlas, a signal, a handshake, a wake-up call. And Atlas responded. Its own jet, previously dormant, fired in the opposite direction, faint but unmistakable. The two beams didn't intersect. They weren't meant to. They formed a symmetrical pair aimed into empty space, like two beacons triangulating a third point still hidden. Analysis took hours. The conclusion required only one sentence. The two objects are mapping something, but what and where? The next breakthrough came from the magnetic field analysis. As the new object pulsed, the flux pattern around it twisted, not randomly, but algorithmically, forming a shifting spiral that the JPL team recognized from earlier Atlas data. The pattern wasn't noise, it was rotational encoding. The objects weren't just communicating, they were synchronizing orientation. Earth had observed an interstellar alignment ritual. The sky grew stranger by the minute. As the pulses intensified, as the jets thinned into needle-like beams, as the internal rings began to accelerate, a chilling realization swept across mission control centers around the planet. This new body wasn't approaching randomly. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't wandering. It was matching Atlas's velocity vector, adjusting speed by fractions of a meter per second, until both objects aligned along a shared trajectory. They were pairing, converging, preparing. This was not the warning. This was step 2. And the real monster, the thing the objects were orienting toward, the thing neither Earth nor any telescope had yet seen, was still beyond the horizon of detection, hidden, silent, approaching. The two interstellar machines had not come alone. They had come early, to prepare the system, to wake the architecture, to signal the path for whatever was following them. Far beyond the boundaries of the solar system, sensors began detecting faint distortions, gravity whispers, so small they were almost lost in background noise. Something massive was inbound, much larger than Atlas, much denser than the newcomer, moving too precisely to be natural. The final readings from the deep space arrays came through in jagged fragments. Even corrupted, the data was enough to reveal one devastating truth. There was a third object, gigantic, silent, and it was decelerating. Objects don't decelerate in interstellar space, not unless they're meant to, not unless they're arriving. The warning was Atlas, the messenger was the second object, and whatever was behind them, that was the real visitor, the one they were preparing the sky for, the one whose energy signature dwarfed both of them combined, and it was no longer theoretical. It now had coordinates, it now had trajectory, and it was aimed directly at the inner solar system. Earth had not found the monster had found Earth, and these two were simply clearing the path. The truth revealed itself not in a burst, but in a silence. For almost an hour the warning object hovered at the edge of Jupiter's magnetosphere, motionless, unresponsive, as though it were listening. The monster NASA had tried so hard to avoid acknowledging, the one they buried behind altered numbers, redacted memos, and half explanations, finally behaved in a way no one predicted. It began to dim, not fade, dim. Its enormous shell, if it could even be called a shell, tightened, contracting in slow, deliberate folds like a creature pulling air into its chest. The fractal plates along its surface locked together, forming a smooth, mirror-like curvature. Every instrument that tried to scan it came back empty. Light slid across it and vanished. Heat signatures flattened to background radiation. Magnetic readings leveled into absolute zero variance. It was still there. But nothing could measure it anymore. It wasn't cloaking. It wasn't hiding. It was preparing. JAXA's deep field trackers saw it first. The space around the object began to ripple, not visually, but gravitationally, as if the vacuum itself were softening. Every ripple pulsed outward in perfectly timed intervals that matched the countdown embedded in 3i Atlas's internal energy rhythm. That's when NASA finally understood. The warning object wasn't new, it wasn't separate. It was the next phase. 3i Atlas hadn't been a messenger, it hadn't been a probe, it hadn't been a threat, it had been a key. The monster, this impossible structure lurking in Jupiter's shadow, responded only when 3i Atlas crossed a threshold in heliocentric distance. Everything since then, the directed jets, the stabilization events, the pulses, the signatures, hadn't been random behavior. They had been signals. And now the receiver was awake. A deep, resonant vibration rolled across the solar system, faint enough for human ears to miss but powerful enough to shake every scientific instrument from Earth to Saturn. The vibration built, cycling through harmonic layers until its final tone settled at a frequency that matched the interstellar background hum itself. The universe answered, not loudly, just noticeably. The monster's surface peeled open, not with violence, not with explosion, but with a smooth, elegant separation, like a flower unfolding under gravity no human technology could replicate. The plates shifted outward, revealing a hollow core so black it made deep space look bright, and then a beam, thin, sharp, silent, pointed, not outward, but downward, toward Jupiter. At first nothing happened. Then the planet's upper atmosphere began to glow, not red, not orange, white, a pure, blinding white that spread across its clouds like liquid metal igniting. Storm bands vaporized, lightning webs accelerated. The great red spot pulsed once, just once, before collapsing inward like a candle flame snuffed by an unseen hand. In the control rooms, nobody breathed. The beam thickened. Jupiter's magnetic field buckled. Auroras exploded across the poles in spirals that reached millions of kilometers high. And then the monster turned the beam. Off. Instantly. The planet dimmed. The atmosphere settled. Even the red spot reformed. Smaller, sharper, reorganizing as though nothing had happened. Every model failed. Every explanation collapsed. This wasn't extraction. This wasn't attack. It was calibration. Whatever the monster was doing to Jupiter, it needed the planet. Maybe as an anchor. Maybe as a power source. Maybe as a stabilizer for what was coming next. But one detail drowned out all the others. The beam was angled, not at Jupiter's center, not at its magnetic axis, but along a trajectory vector that extended perfectly toward Earth. For the first time, analysts could no longer dismiss the pattern as cosmic coincidence or cometary instinct. The sequence was clear, deliberate, escalating. Every move 3i Atlas made, every pulse, every reversal, every impossible geometric behavior had been part of a larger choreography. The monster was answering, and something else, something hidden, was coming into alignment. The final telemetry packet before NASA's sensors saturated carried one chilling conclusion. The monster wasn't reacting to 3i Atlas, it was waiting for it. And now, both were aligned. The last image captured before the signal blackout showed the monster's core pulling inward, condensing toward a single point, dense, bright, and impossibly stable. A star, a seed, a machine, a message, or all of them at once. As the blackout rolled across the deep space network, the final uncorrupted frame contained a shape emerging from the monster's core, small, perfect tetrahedral, and aimed directly at the inner solar system. The warning was never 3i Atlas. 3i Atlas was the introduction. This was the arrival. And now the real question wasn't what the monster was, but whether humanity was ever supposed to see it. The story ends here, but what comes next? That depends on what's already on its way.